In the world of hip-hop, an artist's music often tells only half the story. The other half is written in how they leave the world. For some, death has served as a tragic final chapter that elevated their status to something much larger than life itself. For others, the same tragedy cast a shadow, permanently changing how fans and critics perceive their legacy. When a rapper dies, it doesn't just end their career, it reshapes it. Their lyrics are re-examined, their interviews rewatched, and their cultural relevance redefined. Suddenly, their music takes on new meaning. Songs about pain, mortality, and struggle are no longer just words on a beat. They become eerie predictions, cementing an artist's reputation in ways that living rappers often never achieve. This dynamic explains why figures like Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G. are still spoken about with a level of reverence more than 2 decades after their deaths. Their legacies have been immortalized, not just because of what they accomplished while alive, but because their untimely deaths turned them into symbols far greater than their music alone. For newer generations, the same phenomenon unfolded with rappers like XXXTentacion, Juice WRLD, Pop Smoke, Lil Peep, and Nipsey Hussle. Each had a unique trajectory that was cut short, yet in the aftermath, their reputations were reconstructed, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes criticized, but always transformed. The question then becomes, how exactly does death determine a rapper's legacy? Is it about the timing, the way they died, the lyrics they left behind, or the myths that surround them?
Me dead in the eye, and he was like, I'm not gonna make it past 21.
In this documentary, we'll examine the careers and legacies of rappers whose deaths permanently altered their place in hip-hop history. By the end, it becomes clear that while talent can make someone great, tragedy can make them eternal. To begin, we need to look back at the rapper who, more than anyone else, defined the idea of death-enhancing legacy: Tupac Shakur. Tupac's death in 1996 didn't just mark the loss of one of hip-hop's brightest stars. It cemented him as the blueprint for how death can elevate an artist to mythical status.
Streets turn red, they build bombs, but won't build schools to feed.
Before his murder, Tupac was already one of the most recognizable rappers in America. His albums Me Against the World and All Eyes on Me showcased his ability to switch between politically charged messages, vulnerable reflections, and aggressive street anthems. But while his music was powerful, his reputation was still complicated. At the time of his death, Tupac's career was filled with contradictions. He was celebrated for being a voice of the people, yet criticized for his association with crime and violence. He was admired as a poet and visionary, but also attacked by the media for his legal issues. His image was polarizing, respected but controversial, loved but feared. When Tupac was shot and killed in Las Vegas at the age of 25, everything changed. Suddenly, his lyrics about death and fate weren't just artistic
expression. They were seen as prophecy. Lines like, "I see death around the corner," or "I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world," became central to how fans interpreted his life. Clips of Tupac interviews, where he spoke passionately about inequality and the struggles of young black men in America, resurfaced and circulated endlessly. His words sounded less like casual commentary and more like the final messages of a revolutionary who knew his time was limited.
When you got, we are living in a war zone. It's not as easy as these people are making us think, that they just got some criminal-ass black kids with guns. It is not like that.
This posthumous framing turned Tupac into something greater than a rapper. He became a martyr, an icon, and a cultural leader. In the years following his death, Tupac's legacy only grew. Multiple posthumous albums were released, many of them topping charts, and his unreleased material was treated as sacred. Documentaries, movies, and conspiracy theories surrounding his murder further built the legend. For millions, Tupac wasn't just an artist who died young. He was a symbol of potential cut short, of brilliance that the world wasn't ready to fully embrace. The impact of his death can be measured by the fact that even decades later, discussions about Tupac aren't about whether he was a great rapper, but whether he was the greatest of all time. His passing froze his career at its peak, allowing fans to remember him as forever young, forever powerful, and forever relevant. Tupac's story shows how death can transform a rapper's identity from controversial figure into cultural myth. But it wasn't the only case. Around the same time, just 6 months after Tupac's murder, hip-hop faced another devastating blow with the death of the Notorious B.I.G. Unlike Tupac, whose career was built on a mix of activism and raw vulnerability, Biggie's legacy was rooted in storytelling and lyrical craftsmanship. His rise was meteoric, and his untimely death solidified his status as one of the greatest rappers of all time. Christopher Wallace, better known as Biggie Smalls, had already changed the sound of hip-hop by the mid-1990s. His debut album, Ready to Die, painted vivid pictures of street life, filled with dark humor and cinematic detail. Songs like Juicy and Big Poppa proved he could make mainstream hits without sacrificing authenticity.
Dushes in your bushes, who rock grooves and make moves with all the mommies. The back of the club, sipping my wet is where you find me.
By the time his second album, Life After Death, was released, Biggie had perfected a balance of commercial appeal and lyrical dominance. But his murder in March 1997, at just 24 years old, created a similar effect to Tupac's passing. Biggie's music, much like Pac's, began to be reinterpreted as prophetic. Tracks like Suicidal Thoughts, where he imagined his own death, felt haunting in retrospect. Even his lighter songs gained new meaning when fans considered how little time he had to enjoy his success.
Somebody's trying to kill me. I'll be waking up paranoid. I'll be really scared.
The aftermath of his death turned Life After Death into one of the most successful rap albums ever released, debuting at #1 on the Billboard charts and later going diamond.
This posthumous success wasn't just about the music itself. It was about the sense that fans were holding on to the last words of an artist who would never return. What made Biggie's death especially impactful was the narrative surrounding the East Coast-West Coast rivalry. His feud with Tupac had already defined a generation of rap, and their deaths, so close together, turned the rivalry into a cautionary tale. It wasn't just that two of the most talented rappers had been killed. It was that they had been killed as part of a larger cultural war that the industry itself had fueled. This added a tragic layer to Biggie's story, making him not just a victim of violence, but a symbol of how fame, rivalry, and the streets could collide fatally. Clips of Biggie interviews, where he spoke calmly, almost prophetically, about the dangers of the lifestyle, resurfaced in the wake of his passing. His charisma, humor, and wisdom stood out, painting him as more than just a rapper, but as someone who had the potential to lead the culture in new directions had he lived longer. Today, Biggie is remembered not just as a lyrical genius, but as a legend whose story will forever be tied to tragedy. But as the years went on, new generations of rappers would face the same fate, and unlike the polished legends of the 90s, many of these artists built their legacies in real time, with social media documenting every moment. One of the most striking examples of this phenomenon came decades later, with XXXTentacion. XXXTentacion's death in 2018 showed how, in the modern era, an artist's passing could amplify their influence almost instantly. Unlike Tupac and Biggie, who were already established superstars before their deaths, X was still in the early stages of his career. Yet in the aftermath of his murder, his image transformed from controversial underground artist into one of the most influential figures of his generation.
How does this story end? I live as long as I possibly can, and then boom, I die either of old age or somebody murder me or some shit. You shoot me in my brain, I only gotta feel 2 seconds of pain, and then I don't gotta look at you or look at nobody no more. That's easy.
Before his death, José Onfroy, better known as XXXTentacion, was one of the most polarizing artists in hip-hop. His music ranged from raw, distorted screams to soft, emotional ballads, reflecting a chaotic yet vulnerable personality. He built a loyal following online, especially among younger fans who related to his themes of depression, isolation, and inner conflict. Songs like Jocelyn Flores and Sad connected deeply with listeners who felt misunderstood, while his more aggressive tracks tapped into rage and frustration. At the same time, X's personal life was filled with legal issues and controversies. He faced serious charges, and his reputation was often questioned in the media.
Okay, you grew up in the hood. Wait, you're a fighter? You've been getting in a lot of fights?
Bro, I've been fighting since I was a kid.
What, he's always been throwing the hands or what?
I mean, I've been there plenty situations, like plenty fights.
Many critics argued that his career would always be overshadowed by these problems,
regardless of his musical talent. But when he was murdered in Florida at just 20 years old, everything changed.
They pulled up and we were sitting down eating and he was fucking around with the chopsticks. And we were just sitting there and we started talking about kids. And he was like, "You're gonna be a great dad." I said, "You're gonna be a great dad too someday, bro." He said, "No, I'm not." So, "What do you mean?" And he just looked me dead in the eye and he was like, "I'm not gonna make it past 21. And then just went right back to fucking with the chopsticks. Like he hadn't said a thing.
Overnight, XXXTentacion became a cultural phenomenon. The controversy surrounding his name didn't disappear, but his death reframed the way people consumed his music. Lyrics about death and loneliness suddenly sounded prophetic, and fans began quoting interviews where X spoke about wanting to leave a positive legacy despite his troubled past. One of the most famous clips surfaced after his passing, where X had told fans during an Instagram live, "If I die or ever get sacrificed, I want to make sure that my life made at least 5 million kids happy."
Be a sacrifice. I want to make sure that my life made at least 5 million kids happy.
After his murder, those words felt chilling, yet inspirational, cementing the idea that he saw himself as more than just an entertainer. His single, Sad, broke streaming records within days of his death, eventually becoming one of the most streamed songs in Spotify's history. Posthumous albums like Skins and Bad Vibes Forever continued to build his discography, while murals, tributes, and fan-driven content solidified his presence online. Just 6 months later, on December 8th, 2019, the hip-hop world would lose yet another star, Juice WRLD. Juice WRLD's death in December 2019 highlighted how the loss of an artist can reshape not only their reputation, but an entire generation's relationship with music. Unlike many rappers who leaned heavily on bravado, Juice built his career on emotional vulnerability. His music dealt directly with depression, heartbreak, and substance abuse, creating an unfiltered connection with millions of young listeners around the world. Jarad Higgins, known as Juice WRLD, rose to fame almost overnight with his breakout hit, Lucid Dreams. The song captured the raw pain of lost love, but it also showcased his ability to transform melodic freestyles into chart-topping records. Juice's talent for improvisation became legendary. He was known to freestyle for hours on radio shows, effortlessly creating lyrics that resonated with both fans and critics. By 2019, Juice had positioned himself as one of the leaders of emo rap, bridging the gap between hip-hop and alternative rock. His second studio album, Death Race for Love, debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, and he was already being compared to icons like Future and Travis Scott. What set him apart, however, was how openly he addressed his struggles with addiction and mental health.
Rich?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was something that I was into early, low-key, due to music. The second song I've ever heard by Future, Dirty Sprite, like off the first Dirty Sprite mixtape, had me wanting to sip lean at like 11, 12 years old, bro.
But on December 8th, 2019, Juice WRLD collapsed from a seizure at Chicago's Midway Airport. He was later pronounced dead at just 21 years old. The cause was ruled as an accidental overdose of oxycodone and codeine. His death devastated fans, not only because of his age, but because his music had always sounded like a cry for help, a warning hidden in plain sight. Clips of Juice speaking about his struggles began circulating widely after his death.
I ran into some Percocets my freshman year, 14, 15 years old, 13, 14. I could be telling you, hell no. But your body is dependent, so it's like, it could tear you apart.
Do you feel like you fell into that trap though, as you started to get money and stuff, you just started to do more and more drugs and kind of let it get bad?
I would say, I guess somewhat. I deal with anxiety and depression just because you got money. Money is the answer to certain problems, but it is not the answer to those type of problems.
In one interview, he admitted, "You're not alone. I deal with stuff like this every day." For fans who had leaned on his music for comfort, these words took on a haunting new significance. Suddenly, songs like Legends, where he rapped, "What's the 27 Club? We ain't making it past 21," were no longer just lyrics. They became eerie premonitions.
We're not gonna make it to 21. Yeah. You don't feel that way, do you? Or do you honestly feel that way?